Alright, so it's earlier in the day, so hopefully I won't have jacked up light this time around. Been kind of a weird day. Again. This time last night, the power went out. And okay, so it went out around like 1:30 in the morning, I think. And I don't know if it was, I think it was a little bit after that. I've talked about my dad, and he's had his strokes and all that stuff, and sometimes he's still, trippy as fuck. Last night was definitely evidence of that. So at some point after the power goes out, he ends up opening my door. Of course, I'm awake because I heard the power go off, and when everything, shuts down and goes quiet, when I had like 4 fans going, it's like, you notice that shit, right? So I'm just kind of hanging out with the dogs, and, I had a YouTube thing playing on my phone for music. It was like dog relaxation stuff, so we've been listening to a lot of that recently. I've discovered that my dogs really seem to enjoy it. So it's like, alright, we'll just roll with it. So we've been listening to that. So when everything else shut off, that was still going. And I heard my dad stumbling around, and then he proceeds to open my door. I was like, yes. And he says something about there ain't no lights in this house and it's so damn hot and blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, the power went out. So that's kind of, what happens when all the fans shut off and everything. And of course, the house is opened up, so a lot of the fans are in the windows pulling the night air in. And he stands there for a minute and then asks if I have a flashlight. And so I turn the flashlight on my phone. He almost falls in the door, but ends up turning around and leaving. After stumbling and catching himself, luckily, because had dogs down there and don't want to take a chance of him squashing them. But he proceeds to go into my bathroom, which I didn't realize until about 5 minutes later when I decided to run in there real quick, and my toilet paper's on the floor. It's like, why was he in here? He was in there apparently just to fuck things up, because the toilet paper was like on the floor right in front of the toilet. There was a towel hanging up on the toilet paper holder. Okay, I have this ledge in my tub that I have 2 big bottles of conditioner and a big bottle of shampoo on, because I gotta have the fancy stuff for my fancy colors. And on the other side, which was the side closest to the toilet, there were 2 bottles of bubble bath. And all of that was in the tub. My trash can was out of the tub and on the side of the ledge, the ledge of the, outside wall of the tub. And there was a couple things in my laundry basket that were knocked out. And I just went in there and it's like, what in the hell did he do? Because I don't think he used it or anything. I think he just went in there and was like being clumsy and knocking shit everywhere. And it's like, cool. But then my mom went and chased him down a little bit later, and she said he was sitting outside on the porch because it was so damn hot in the house. It's like, well, I mean, at least he gets that this time, because the other day I walked into the family room and he's closed all the windows and has the heater on and is laying there in a Depends. And I was just like, you can put layers on. That's the nice thing about being cold. You add layers and you're less cold. But if you're just running around in your diaper, then that's kind of not real helpful. But this has been... I don't know, he's been confused kind of all day, and everything's kind of been... I mean, he slept a lot, but of course we were up half the night anyway because the power was off, and it's just... I almost went back to sleep, and then it's like, well, not quite ready for that yet. Luckily, I got my little push light on my headboard that has the little different colors, and it's got a little remote to it. But it's battery operated, so I turned that on, and I ended up writing for a while. And, eventually got back to bed. I think the power, it was about 9:30 when the power came back on, or not 9:30, 5:30 when the power came back on. And, so I went ahead and fed all the dogs and went back in there and went back to sleep. But it's just like the whole thing's just kind of been jacked up. But I think he had an appointment this morning, and then, they were gone for a while, and then when they got home, he was just asleep on the couch most of the day. But then at some point, the power company sent out some people to cut the trees in our front yard because we have power lines that go through there now, so they have to keep the trees off the power lines. So they were doing that. And at one point I went through the kitchen and my dad asks where they're cutting the trees at, and I said, in our front yard. And he said, oh, well, that's why it's so loud then. It's like, yeah. That and the house is open. So yeah, those are two dead giveaways. That's why it's so daggone loud right now. So he proceeds to get a couple shoes, doesn't put them on his feet, carries them outside, goes over to his truck, sets them on the cover of the bed of the truck, and keeps looking at the truck door like he can't figure out how to open it. And like he was looking in his pocket for the key at one point. I thought he was just going to open the truck door and put the shoes in there and lose them there. Like we're on a, we keep doing with the phone and the wallet. They get lost every few days now. But I don't know. At least he had clothes on, so at least there was that when he goes out to supervise the guys cutting the trees. He at one point went over to the driver's side, but it didn't look like he was... I mean, he's got one of the keypads, so I thought he was going to put the code in, but I don't think he did that. I mean, he probably doesn't even know it at this point in time. But it was just a whole... And then he proceeds to... He must have unlocked it because the tailgate did open. And he ended up sitting on the tailgate with his shoes. He's just wandering around in his socks outside. And then when my mom got home, I helped her carry in some groceries, and then she said she checked on him, and the reason he didn't have shoes on his feet was because he had two different shoes, but they were the same foot. It's like, well, that's a good reason not to wear them, I guess. But yeah, so that's our little trippy adventure these days. Such is my life. Got the hair on my shirt. That's going to annoy me. Anyway. So last night, I was just kind of brainstorming and thinking through different things. I'd like to take a moment to specify that this is a vlog, and the point is not being accurate in my understanding of information. It's piecing things together in a way they make sense for me with the lots of details So it's like I always pick up on like weird things. And yeah, okay, I saw a quote the other day that was talking about not every dream is meant to be realized. Some dreams are just to get you closer to the real dream, and get you closer on that path toward the real dream. I was like, that makes sense, right? So like there's been lots of things. Like I've gone back and forth with the possibility of moving out to Oklahoma with my brother and his family for a while. Because on the one hand, it is an opportunity, right? They have space. They said I could do it. It would just be a matter of getting my shit together and getting out there. Which obviously is the finances are the hold up there. But I'm kind of back on the fence about that, and I kind of think of it in that that sort of frame of reference, that it keeps coming up as a possibility. When they first mentioned it in December that I could go somewhere with them if they ended up moving, that was the thing that sort of opened me up to the possibilities of being able to go somewhere else, right? Because at that point I was still thinking, fucking 41 at that point in time, and feeling stuck at my parents' house because I haven't put the pieces together on getting out of that situation just yet, right? There's a lot to navigate through as far as trying to line up with my path and do what I'm supposed to be doing, and getting to where I'm meant to be going, essentially. So when they opened up the possibility of being able to relocate with them, then it at least gave me the sort of opportunity to consider, where would I go if I could go anywhere. So I started brainstorming on that end of things for a while. And then, like from there, it's like I had this sort of scenario. Yeah, okay. So once I started asking that question, I talked about how like Philadelphia has come up a lot. And then I started seeing like this little like cottage type house. And I see this, it's like my space, and like most of the stuff that I see in this house takes place in this room that is, it's a big living area attached to the kitchen, which it's, both of those are opened up, and then of course my desk is in there, and there's like a little sunroom porch kind of a thing, that is like right off of that, and that goes into the backyard, right? So I've seen this space, I started seeing, how I might paint this space and what I might do with the space and that kind of thing, right? So it's like one possibility opens me up to other possibilities. So then I'm just kind of liking the idea of this little cottage type house. And I found that when I started going back to the possibility of, now that they're relocated to Oklahoma, once I started considering that, it's like the other things started to kind of fade out. I was getting these messages about lacking clarity on your manifestation. It says, make sure you're not getting in the way of yourself on these manifestations and what you want to invite in. And there's one card deck in particular. I saw the card again yesterday. It was from the Kyle Gray 22 Archangels deck, I believe, and I think it's Archangel Jophiel, and it talks about how if you're not seeing your manifestations, it's because, you're not really clear on your intentions, and you need to get clear about what it is that you want, right? So I was thinking, it's like, if I see myself in this space with, like, my brother and his family, it's like, sure, there would be good things about it. I've talked about, we could collaborate on freaking YouTube project or something. Biggest thing is enjoying not being in a space that, belongs to my parents. That is, like, ideal. But, like, when I have started to look at it, it's like, my brother and I are pretty tight, and we have a lot to talk about, but at the same time, it feels like there's so much of it that is caught up in the weird chaos with our parents. And it's like, if I live out there with them, how much time are we going to end up spending talking about stuff with them, because, I'm more inclined to cut them off completely, whereas he doesn't really feel the need to do that part, especially with Gracie. She stayed with my mom for a long time, right? Like, she was coming over every day for a lot of years, and spent a whole lot of time with her, and me, because I moved back up here when she was, like, I moved back up here in 2019. She would have been 2, getting ready to turn 3. So she's had a lot of time with Grandma. And she still calls Grandma a lot to check in. So there would still be that kind of connection. And then also, if I do disconnect to the point where they don't have any kind of, they don't have access to what I'm doing, Gracie would essentially end up being a kind of access on that, which would be kind of a pain in the ass on that end. So it's like, it's definitely a feasible opportunity, but would it be my best bet? I said, or should I go back to, just imagining my little cottage house, my little black cottage house with the crazy walls, crazy interior, and I really like that idea of that space, for lots of reasons, of course, but yeah, like, I don't know. I think the biggest snag on, like, considering going out and staying with my brother and his family is just that part of moving away from the area would be to get my parents out of my system, and that situation would basically also kind of lock me into still being connected to them more than I would like to be. And I know that probably sounds really shitty to be talking about cutting and running, I guess, as far as my parents go. But that's another thing. I gotta stop with that mindset as much of anything. Is like, I always have the tendency to revert back to, that sounds kind of shitty, and, it kind of feels kind of shitty because, probably because of all these damn cancer placements, and my inclination for family to be this big important thing, and yet also knowing that my family has not been real helpful on my journey, right? Like, I get so caught up in feeling obligated to what I was raised in and feeling like it makes me a shitty person somehow for wanting to have an existence disconnected from them. But it's fucking toxic. You know, it's like, okay, the shit going on with my dad, like the strokes and everything. If you want my honest opinion, I think a big part of the reason that he is having the health issues he's having now is because he doesn't have access to my brother and my energy anymore. Like, we cut that, so we're not getting pulled into their chaos. And what happened, like, it was noticeable pretty quick after, you know, I started pulling back my energy, that my grandfather started going downhill. You know, and then, like, my grandma and my dad, you know, are both not doing so great. And my mom's kind of, yeah, I don't know. It's like energetically, I can kind of see how she's also still robbing the energy supply of family members as well. You know, taking after her daddy in that way. So it's like, I can't be forever feeling bad that, you know, I don't want this existence anymore. That's probably largely why I'm still there right now, is because I get wishy-washy on that whole thing. You know, and it's so easy to get pulled back into the chaos. And it's like, I'm doing pretty good about not going completely into it. But then every now and then it's like, something will come up and it's like, damn it, I did it again. Here we go again. Right? So it's like, what can you do on that end? And it's a good question of which I do not know the answer to. But I know that there is a purpose for me being there right now, and I'm not going to be there forever. And if it feels like it sometimes, I know, you know, like, just the fact that I've changed as much as I have in the past 2 years. That says to me that I am, you know, capable of getting out of that situation. It's just, I gotta stop getting in my way of getting out of that situation. And I don't know fully how to do that. Sorry. You know, I just feel like if I end up with my brother's family, I'm still going to get pulled back into it to some extent, because that's kind of our main talking point as of right now. I mean, of course, we talk about music and all sorts of other shit too, but still, the fact that it comes up at all, I mean, which, of course, he's going to give a shit about the fact that I'm there, stuck in that situation right now, so he's going to hear me out on it. But it's like, when I get out of that situation, is it always going to be that way just because it's always been something we've talked about? So yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so I was thinking earlier, okay, so I kind of was spouting off about, you know, some, like, weird connections I was making with, like, you know, Horus and the Eye of Ra and, like, all these things. Well, today I looked it up because, you know, every now and then, like, the Eye of Ra stuff gets kind of muddy, and, you know, I was, like, verifying what Exactly. It is. And yes, largely destruction is a big part of it. But it's also like the Eye of Ra is like the feminine aspect of Ra. So, doesn't quite go with what I was talking about yesterday, which again, that's the point of this, isn't to be accurate, it's to make sense of the information that I do have and, try to connect the dots. And sometimes, I might think something goes somewhere and then it doesn't, but it still serves a purpose of helping me to understand something bigger than that. Right? So it's like, it's still useful, even if it's not exactly what I was thinking about, or what I had generally thought of on my little tangent. And I feel like that's a big part of, there's my fives, of just the process too, is, talking it out of my system. Because I collect so much in my system that I can't make sense of it until it's leaving my system. So, yeah, it might not be right, but if it still helps me on the path of refining the overall point that I'm looking for, it still feels useful, somewhat valid. And there is a bug's leg on my windshield that is really kind of bothering me. Let me go ahead and flip it. It's right, yeah, that dude. And of course, I can't, I don't know, it looks like it might have been like a little cricket or something. And, okay, so when they were cutting trees, there is a tree that this thing parks under, so it probably came out of that tree, but it's just, stuck on my windshield, and it's got the leg, and then it's, the little bend of the other leg, and then there's, the little, I don't know, like an arm-looking thing off of it. I wish I could zoom in on that better, but I can't. But, yeah, and it's got little spikes like crickets and stuff have on their legs, so I don't know, it's weird. If the car was on, I guess I could, hit the windshield wipers, but, yeah. What it makes me think is, when I was in high school, I had two cats, Tigger and Sassy, and Tigger was awesome. She was a Manx, so she didn't have a tail, and Sassy was very sweet, but honestly, if I wouldn't have gotten her, I probably would have had Tigger her entire life, because Tigger was awesome. Sassy was really sweet, but she had this bad habit where we think she was, taken away from her mom too soon, so she would, suck on my shirt, and I would wake up with huge wet spots all over my shirt, and it bothered me. It really grossed me out a whole lot. So, then when I end up dating the guy that I thought I was going to marry, and he said he didn't like cats, it became easy to consider rehoming them. We did, however, find somebody who was familiar with both cats that, were not properly weaned, as well as, the little Manx cats. So there was that, but still. But anyway, early on with Tigger, I think she's probably, 3 or so at this point in time. I am walking through, I go from the hallway into the living room to the kitchen. Kitchen light's on, and that's the only light, so, I can't see a whole lot, but I can see a little bit of a shadow. All at once I see her locked in on something. It's like, what is she looking at? And I turned on the light just to see, it's a cricket, a big one, and right about that time she grabs it and takes it back to my room, because that's also her room, and I was freaking out because she takes this stupid cricket back to my room. She proceeds to eat all of it except for one leg, and that one leg stayed in my doorway for a while because it freaked me out so much to walk past it. And I was trying to like avoid it. It's like, yeah, that could have been like taken care of real easy with a vacuum cleaner. For whatever reason, I just like, it was just easier for it to gross me out and to like, jump around it every time I'm going through that spot. I don't know. I was in high school. It doesn't make sense. Whatever. It is what it is. But that leg was there for a while. And that's what that's giving me, or reminding me of. So, just a call back to that story, I guess. So I was kind of feeling, I don't know, last night I was kind of feeling a little off by the time I was getting ready for bed. And I still don't really know what to attribute that to. I did my video, everything was fine, but then, as I'm watched the video, post it, no big deal. But somewhere along the line, it's just started, kind of getting in a less optimistic, high vibe type space. And by the time I was getting ready to go to, it's probably because there was too much time on like Instagram, and I need to cut that shit out because that pulls you into the chaos again, and I don't like that. But especially around like the political bullshit that's going on right now. But anyway, I started thinking last night about my little cottage house, and it's like I could totally go for the, being the witch in the woods kind of a thing. My little black cottage house with my bright, funky colored interior on it, far away from all the people. And then I was thinking, it's like, yeah, except for the whole political, bullshit that's currently going on is trying to actively make that so it's no kind of, take us back to the dark ages, basically, right? So, and take care of, or take away all, like, women's rights and, like, healthcare and reproduction and all that stuff. Because, as I've talked about many times, because, the more women find their own healing and have their own sense of genuine autonomy away from the system, ain't nobody gonna wanna, just be a baby maker for some douchebag that's not going to be a worthwhile partner and, just wants a baby maker. Nope. So, of course, their only way to make it so that has to happen and, help get rid of the male loneliness epidemic or whatever is to snuff women's rights again and turn them back into baby makers, right? So essentially the whole, like if I was able to become the witch in the woods, there are fucking asshats that, would very much try to snuff that, like, bring back the Salem witch trials kind of a thing, and, all the glorious things that Christianity has brought us. Like the Crusades and 333. The Crusades and slavery and, like coming into this nation and destroying the people that were already here because they wanted what they had, right? And, I think it was wanting to say the term witch wasn't used as a derogatory type term until like 1400. And of course, it got added in because, the witches were generally, widows who had, gained property because their husband died, and so they had some kind of property, which thus they had something the Christians wanted. So of course, they decide they're all witches and witches are bad, and then go around killing all these people, which were actually healers. And Yeah, so like that's the whole thing. But anyway, yeah. Because I was thinking about the being a witch in the woods, and this seemed like a fitting shirt today. So, but yeah, it's like, and then of course going back to the Salem witch trials is because it's just easy to start throwing that word around when somebody pisses you off or you want something that somebody else has or whatever. So you just turn them into these evil beings, right? And then make it okay to, like, okay, if they attempt to drown somebody, if they don't drown and they're able to survive, well, clearly it's a witch. If they drown, well, they were probably saved from being a witch, right? But either way, it's like, got a whole bunch of crazy ass people just stealing from everybody else, and they make up whatever excuses to do so. So, yeah. Anyway, recently I've been thinking, this one I think does fit. I remember when I was going to church all the time and, studying my Bible and all that crap that, good Christians are supposed to do and whatnot. I remember they talk about, it's in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Testament, whatever you want to call it, talking about the Ark of the Covenant. And I verified this before I left the house, but it's like the Ark of the Covenant. I was pretty sure that was what I was thinking about, but I couldn't remember if that was exactly what it was called. But then when I looked it up, it said that was basically the box that was carried around while the Hebrew people were roaming the desert. That was, essentially, that's where God was. Right? So I remember thinking a lot, and like this is one of my biggest frustrations with like the whole religion, was the idea that God could be contained in a box. Well, it's like, yes, God is so big and powerful that you can keep him in this box, and that's like all you got to worry about. Well, then I was kind of thinking about it. It's like, I mean, I feel like this is kind of the same thing, right? Not like this specific version, but this was, I still have a few different Bibles. At one point I had like 15 different translations and versions and whatnot. That's the one I think I needed for seminary. So it's been used a lot, but at the same time here lately, it just kind of gets tossed around. But it's like, that's kind of the same principle behind that book. It's like there are so many people, especially proclaiming to be Christians, that don't actually give a shit about anything that, Jesus said or did. It's like everything else that supports the bullshit that they want to throw around. But it's like, that's basically, the modern day version of God in a box, right? God in a book. And, I've been thinking about that a lot lately. It's like, I feel like, first, it'll probably come out whenever if ever I confront somebody on attacking somebody for their beliefs and whatnot. The idea of not using that book. Give me a story from your lived experience that supports what's in that book without using that book. Because I don't think most of them can do it. I know when I was going like to church all the time, it's like I wanted like the faith of the different people. Like, I've talked about, I think it was Ezekiel that, went dancing through the streets or whatever because what he was, learning and his revelations of God or whatever. I think Deborah, was she the judge? I feel like she was a judge. Anyway, like, there were a bunch of different figures that I remember reading about, and it's like, I want that kind of faith. I want that kind of assurance in what I believe. I want that, that sort of passion and the excitement because, it's like real or true or there's something about it there, right? And it's like, I just, you don't get that from people these days in the church. It's like, if they don't just, spew passages at you as the, the thing to smack you over the head with it, they don't really have their own experience. They have stories of people having experiences of God, and that's what they have. But it's like, where's your experience of God? Because mine came once I started walking away from that. And it's like, of course, the book can be useful. Absolutely. I've spent a lot of time studying it. And thanks to my TBIs, it took no time losing it all. But at the same time, like, the biggest thing is, it's like, people don't seem to have their own experience of that being true. And I feel like that's kind of the bigger point. And like, I feel like that's what I'm learning here more recently, especially is, okay, part of why I struggled so long with using my voice is because, a big part of my path, because of things that I prayed for when I was younger, I wanted that kind of faith in something that you can only get through lived experience of the thing, right? So how God or the universe or whatever is guiding me on my path. And of course, once I realized church was the thing that kept me stuck in a toxic marriage that I never should have been in to begin with, but it was also one of those things that was the reason I got into a toxic marriage. It was like, once that had to end, I divorced my ex, I divorced my entire belief system. It's like, this didn't do anything for me except for keep me stuck in a toxic, emotionally abusive connection. And that's not ideal. So yeah, it's like, what of your lived experience demonstrates that is the way it is? And like, that's the big thing too. It's like, even the stories that I've revisited in the past, the past couple of years of this, like, twin flame journey thing, like mythology and whatnot. Okay. It's been a long time since I had my world my world religion courses, and, we talked about mythology. I have a bunch of mythology books and stuff, but I don't go reading them a whole lot. Like, every now and then something will get my attention and I'll start looking something up. Like the Eye of Horus. that of course being the biggest one, and yes. So the thing that stood out in the past couple of years is how, like, even those stories shift, right? And okay, like, I remember the version of the Medusa story where, Medusa's this monster and she turns people to stone. So was it Perseus that ended up cutting her head off and all that stuff? So that was like the version that I carried with me for a long time. Somewhere along the line, there was like this idea of a backstory for Medusa and what that would be like. And then it introduced this sort of idea that, you know, she'd been raped by, I don't remember which god. And so that god's wife turned her into this sort of monster type being, which then brings on the question of because part of that story was that it was not punishment, but kind of punishment, but also not punishment somehow. And it's probably, again, because there's like multiple versions of the same stories, and you know, it's just different ways of understanding things. That's the point of stories, is it's a different way of understanding it. So if you can't speak from your own experience of anything true that's in that book, what do you have to go on? Right? So I always felt like it was really sad to sort of believe that God gave the people this book, the information in this book, and then abandoned them. But that's basically what it felt like. You know, that goes back to that idea of God in a box. God in the book. That's the only way you have access to God. But it's like, what if that's the only access you have to God? That doesn't seem like it'd be a very powerful God. Yeah. And if he's not powerful, then why would you follow him? Yeah, anyway. So, you know, then there was the story that made it so it was a means of punishment, but then it was also a means of protection. And then, as I've been doing my healing work, the protection means actually started to make sense. You know, because I spent all this time on here talking about, you know, like the shit with my cousin, and, you know, him spreading rumors about me from the time I was 8 years old all the way through high school. And it was something that came back when I was 30 and again when I was 35. You know, as two of the bullies ended up resurfacing for a time. It was like, as I was healing from that and, you know, really releasing some of the, you know, the bad beliefs about myself, it actually did kind of make sense that it could serve as a means of protection, because, you know, there's like essentially the people that would do her harm, you know, she just have to look at them and turn them to stone, right? So, which, another thing that makes me think of is, so I have a look, and I used to use this look on occasion when I needed to, I guess, scare people into, not being dicks or whatever, I guess, I don't know. Okay, when I was in 5th grade, I think, was the first time I really discovered it. And there was this little kid, and I'm wanting to say, I'm not confident of this, but there was this guy in my section and marching band and, you know, and drumline stuff named Neil, and I kind of wonder if it was him. So, like, so I'm not sure on the time frame, because he would have been a couple years younger than me, which, I mean, maybe I was in 4th grade. I don't know. What I remember was I was pissed at my mom for some reason, and we were walking through the school at night, and I'm wanting to say it was like parent-teacher conference type thing, and this little kid is walking through with his mom, and he looks at me, and I was pissed at her, so I gave him this kind of death look, and he was like, like immediately. And then I remember kind of thinking that might be useful. Right? The fact that, I just scared this little kid. That was something that kind of stayed on reserve in case, I needed to protect myself from something, if you will. And I used it a few times in band. So I've talked about Matt a bunch on here, and he was kind of, when I was the pit section leader, he was sort of the assistant section leader. He was my backup, and I thought he was like a way better musician than I was. So anything like when it came to more complex parts, I gave them to him. And I was usually reverting to give me my marimba and not like leave me the fuck alone. Like I don't want to go anywhere other than this thing. Because my junior year, which was my first year as section leader, was the year that we got the actual marimbas. And it's like, this is my baby. It's like nobody's gonna separate me from this thing. It's like, this is what I'm playing from like here on. And it was. So he got like all the xylophone parts because, they were usually the more complicated things, and I didn't like that it was kind of barky and bitey sounding, and it's like, it made me uncomfortable. And for somebody that, had issues using my voice for a long time and drawing attention to myself, that was something that would draw attention to me, then I did not want that. So I did not, prefer that method. Now, that said, I've talked about the pit instructor that, was trying to get me to play this part slightly differently. And I got really frustrated, because there was this night, it was like before we went to the final, I think it was the final weekend of contests for when we won the world championship thing. We had a contest, and one of the judges said that they would like the show better if it was like completely flipped. And so I'm not going to guarantee it was at the very end of the season, but I feel like it was. But we had this night where we flipped the entire show, like all the marching, they kind of reversed how everything was done and whatnot. And while we were doing this is the time that the pit instructor decided to have me tweak this one little piece. And it was like something as simple as moving, I don't remember if it was like a 16th note or I don't know. One of the little like triplet notes. Does that have I don't know what other name that would be outside of the triplet. But that's the three. So I don't know. Anyway, so he kept coming back and trying to get me to flip this thing. And he had done it a couple other times in the season, and I for whatever reason I couldn't get it. And this night he decided, he wanted to try to get me to do it. And we just kept going over and over again playing this part, and he would sing it to me, and then I would play it back, and I was getting so frustrated because I was not getting what he was trying to get me to do. And like I'm gonna roll with the 16th note because it was just that kind of just a little blip. And he had me feeling so completely stupid because I could not figure out what it was that he was wanting me to do. And it's like, normally if somebody sings me something, I can figure that out. So when I went over and was talking to my ex, well, it wasn't my ex at that time, but back then, it's like, I was like really frustrated. He could tell I was really frustrated. I was like, I feel like he's hearing what I'm playing, and when he goes to tell me what he wants me to play, he's saying what I'm already doing. I said, I could just be like completely wrong. It's like, but that that's what it feels like is happening. And he said he could see that. And, or he said, I don't know, something, he supported me on the whole thing. And it felt like it was him giving me permission to not feel like I was a total idiot. Because, you know, that guy had me feeling completely stupid at that point. I was just so frustrated. And, you know, just, honestly, it was, had it not been the end of the season, that probably would have, like, made the whole thing even more rough. The way that, just the way that whole thing went. But it's like, I feel like he's trying to tell me this change he wants me to make, but then he's singing it to me as I'm already playing it. I was like, maybe I'm just stupid. I don't know, but you know, I just got really hung up on that, and like, I was having a shitty evening on that end, you know, and yeah, you know, we always liked our drumline instructors a whole lot too, and you know, find out years later that that guy was apparently a pain in the ass to the battery instructor. You know, like, they were right there, pretty good on all these things, but then at the same time, it seems like the stories, okay, like at Tyler's, after his funeral, when we had the get together for a bunch of, you know, drumline people, seemed like the other guy had really amped up his shithead tendencies, and was like, you know, maybe even had some of that narcissism thing going on too. So, you know, in the stories that the other guy was saying about him, it's like, you know what, that actually makes perfect sense. And, you know, like, from that perspective, as him being another narcissistic type figure, that absolutely makes sense, especially for, like, my life and experiences, and, you know, that tendency to draw that type to me, just for them to help me to feel completely stupid in and of myself, because I didn't feel like that. That was just a shitty night. But anyway, that, like, the story wasn't even the purpose. The purpose of that story was the Matt piece. So Matt, he was a great dude. One of the things he said at the thing for the little Tyler memorial thing that we did, he had a couple things that he said to me that night that was just like, it just completely blew my mind. Well, actually, the one thing blew my mind was, he said it wasn't that any of us was, like, really a spectacular player in and of ourselves. He said it was, we all took our parts and played them well, and we played them well together. And it's like, that was the first thing that kind of gave me permission to see that whole thing completely different, really, because I'd always looked at it from the perspective as I absolutely sucked at music, and, you know, I was like an imposter. But at the same time, it's like, I knew early on in my band career, I don't know at what point in my life I really kind of knew that, like, there was some kind of leadership thing that I was supposed to do. But then when that situation, you know, when I ended up becoming the section leader for 2 years, 4 seasons, it was marching band and winter percussion. It's like, I always knew I could do the leadership side of things, but it's like, I always felt like I really sucked at the music part. And when he said that, it was just kind of like, huh. It's like, I had never considered that possibility. I just assumed that everybody else was really good and that I was really bad, but at least I could be a leader. So, you know, but then it's like, he gave me permission to see that a different way. And it was like, wow. But then, and the other thing that he said was that I had this really scary look. That was the point of that story. It was like, I remember using it too, because a bunch of the drumline guys were playing football in the band room, and I told them they better not hit my marimba. And sure enough, they hit my marimba when I was over there by it, and I was just like, I was just like pissed, and I was like, and I just like gave them the look, and they were like, yeah, she's right, we probably shouldn't play this in here. But yeah, it's like, so I get that whole look thing. It's like, on that end, it's kind of I could see how it's a useful protective measure for keeping people away. And I definitely think I did that on occasion. But then of course, trying to be the good Christian girl and being nice, because that's what you're supposed to do, right? You're supposed to be nice to people even if they treat you like shit. It's like, no, that's not right. That's not right at all. That just lets people run you over, diminish you, and kind of chips away at your own sense of self-worth, because you're nice to somebody who you quite frankly should not have been nice to. Like the various stories that I've talked about how somebody ended up gaining access to my energy when they never should have had it. Like the guy from undergrad, the house pastor's son. The first time I went into the Baptist house where I lived my senior year, it was a house that had been donated by one of the Ball families, because I went to Ball State. It was one of the old Ball family mansions. It had been donated to the American Baptist Association, and so they used it as like a housing ministry, right? And so I got to hang out there in the last year of its existence as a house ministry, and loved it, even though it was like falling apart. That place had character, and I have lots of stories from that. So, but anyway, when I first went there to get the tour, there was the house pastor's son was there, and I'm talking to the guy giving the tour, and it's like, cool. Seems like a really cool place. And this guy shows up, and he goes, like, shifts into like he's just seen something he's really excited about, and turning on the being sweet and showing off and all that kind of stupid crap. And it's like, I didn't take him seriously, but at the same time, when I end up living at the house, okay, there were 2 nights I stayed there by myself, and it was creepy as hell when I first moved in, because I was there for summer school, and there ended up being 2 other girls that moved in, one of which was the girlfriend, now wife, of the guy that gave me the tour and told me about the house. And that guy was, this other guy's friend and all that stuff. So, once we went out a couple times, it was like no big deal kind of a thing, but he was around a lot. But I also knew he wasn't somebody that could actually seriously handle my energy. Right? So it's like, the fact that I entertained the connection at all, I mean, it was really kind of a joke. Never should have happened. However, it did. And because of that, when it went bad, and, it didn't take long, the big thing was, like, he showed up and was waiting on me for something. I was up in my room and talking to one of my former housemates. And I told her I had to go because Matt was there. And she's like, ooh, who's mad? Is that your boyfriend? For me, I saw that as the opportunity to, I knew, like, we were nowhere near that kind of serious, but I also knew that he would absolutely flake if he thought that was, there was more to that conversation. I said what she said. He interpreted it as, I was trying to push him for that, I guess. I don't know. But he, like, completely, like, crumbled and, disappeared and started telling all his friends that I was crazy and all this shit. And it's like that didn't really bother me because it was just kind of one of those, you proved it, right? I knew you were going to do that. You reacted exactly how I knew you would if something like that came up, so it was kind of a means of, it was my attempt at pushing him back because he kept showing up. It worked. He stopped showing up. But then, however, later on in the semester, he didn't even go to that school anymore at that point. So he was just showing up because his dad was the house pastor. But he stopped showing up, which, of course, everybody that had lived there the year before, which there was a bunch of them. There's at least 5 people that were around a lot that had been there around, or had been around him the year before, and he was a friend of, and then he's like completely flaked out. So, of course, when I was living with them and he stopped showing up, of course they were right with me. Because we were living together and we're good friends. But, they'd kind of make fun of him and whatnot. But, yeah, he was talking trash about me. At the time, okay, I've talked about the one girl that ended up being my best friend for like 15 years. Her husband, or ex-husband, it was before they got married, right before me and her really met and connected. The first time I met her, she was showing up to collect the projector from the Baptist house to take it to Tennessee for their wedding. And I remember I was all concerned about whether it was coming back, or, like, I didn't say anything about it, but I was all concerned about whether or not the projector was coming back because we were having Tetris tournaments and it was awesome on the big screen. And, yeah. But that was like the first time I really met her. But her husband at that point, he was really good friends with this dude. So when he's trash talking me, her husband was going right along with it. And then as he got to know me, at one point he was just like, I am so sorry that I ever believed him and that I ever said shitty things about you and blah, blah, blah. It's like, dude, whatever. It's like I knew how he was going to react before he reacted that way. So it was just kind of like, I don't know, like just like a little flick and bam, he's gone. Right? So it's like I already knew how that was going to play out. I didn't understand the full capacity of it. And I've talked on here many times about how I went out with a bunch of my housemates. We went to a bar because we want to go dancing. Bar off campus. And that dude had a couple friends that were there. And one of them recognized me, I guess. I think it was more they were familiar with the people that I lived with. And, made the connection that way. But anyway, one of them ended up with my phone number, I think that he had gotten from the douche dude, and he was making like shitty comments basically about how I should have been raped or whatever, and it's like, so it was like, it was just not a real wonderful time in my life. And of course I didn't know the number that the messages were coming from. And we, kind of talking to a couple of the guy friends that I had in the house, I think we had kind of like a general idea of who it probably was. Um, and I blocked his number pretty quick, but it's like the whole fact that I had entertained the friend at all, the one that wasn't making the rapey comments, um, was the only reason that guy ended up with access to my energy. Like, otherwise, he would have, like, we never would have come into contact at all because, that we didn't hang out in the same places until that one night, right? So, yeah, and there was another guy that was kind of that way too, and it's like, basically, trying to be a nice person allowed me to get involved with connections that were not healthy and I had no business associating with whatsoever, which ended up kind of, being the sort of proverbial giving the devil a foothold kind of a thing, because, that guy might not have, the house pastor's son might not have been that awful, but he hung out with people that were that awful and were able to say the things that they were saying, right? So then when I first really made that connection, I think back in the fall, with how that guy had any kind of access to my life, period, 11111, then I started piecing it together with, those last several months with my ex, after I'd been gone for the 9 months and I went back to Alabama for the one last hurrah, either, it's make it or break it time. And I had to believe that we were in it, right? So I took all of my shit back, because we had to believe that it was a legitimate attempt to make it work. And he started, making the same comments about should have raped you when I had a chance and all that kind of bullshit. It's like, so then when I started piecing it together in the fall, it's like, that right there, like, my ex always knew. Like, I think the biggest reason he started saying that was because he knew that it would piss me off. But it's like the fact that I ended up with somebody that could say that kind of stuff, I think was because the other guy that should never have had access to me ended up with access to me through this other person that never should have had access to me. And, it was just kind of a downhill, slippery slope kind of thing, from then on. So then when I end up, I'm married to a douchebag that starts saying he should have raped me when he had the chance, then it was like, this is a callback to the other thing, isn't it? So it's like, just like all these different layers of like different wounding along the way that I've had to kind of work my way through. But like, honestly, I don't know. I've used that look on my ex a few times too, but I think the bigger thing was that, like, with him, I, was already feeling shitty enough about myself that it wasn't as big of a thing. He kind of took it as a joke, but it's like, I can see how that whole, going back to the idea of the, Medusa and turning people to stone, how that was a means of protection for her. And that was why, like, Medusa's come up so many times on this journey, and I think that's, like, the biggest reason why, too, is, like, the look to push people back and say, get the fuck away from me, you have no business anywhere near me, kind of a thing. And, yeah, but, like, even that story, like, there have been different things that have kind of made me think differently about the story too. Of course, I heard the protection bit as I was doing my own healing work, so then it takes on like this new level of meaning. And of course, I cannot honestly tell you. I think it was like reading something on Amazon where somebody had written a book about like a new perspective on it. I think that's where it came from. But there are a lot of things that I could not honestly tell you whether it's something that I picked up in dreams or something that I've heard in my waking life that made me think about something differently. So it's like, like it's not necessarily that the things have to be right. My stomach's making noises. Sorry. But it is just the opportunity for it to give me another way to look at things, right? So like, I've showed, I got this, I don't know, sometime in the past couple years. I think it was early on in the first few months of the whole twin flame thing, like after I knew who he was. I found this picture off Etsy, and like I was really drawn to it, and it had Medusa as, kind of like the maiden girl, and the snakes are like kind of toned down, if you will, and she is standing with, I think it's Perseus, but I'm not going to swear to that, so it's like, obviously not the version where he's cutting her head off kind of a thing, but, in the picture, it honestly kind of, like, there's something about, like, I think the hair or something that reminded me of the twin flame, but this image, I was really drawn to it, so it's like, I need this in my space. So I got it in my space, and partly because it reminded me of, like, a music video that I've seen him in, but also just because, like, the story that the image tells that's so much different than, the usual mythological stories that you hear of it. And like in the picture, it's like they're not looking at each other, but the snakes are like calmed down, and honestly, what it made me think of was like the twin flame journey, of course, and it's like, all the things that I've used to protect myself from people that have actively been hurtful to me along the way. Like coming into that place of putting down my defenses to try to navigate the healing process. And it's like there's this thing that is motivating me to keep moving forward on this whole journey, and like all the times that I would have wanted to quit and go into hiding, like all the fucking times I've dreamed about being in the bathroom, because I realized that that was how I always, that was one of the ways I've protected myself largely throughout my lifetime, was going and hiding in the bathroom. And I, like, around middle school and high school, and getting mocked by people in the hallway, you get mocked a lot less if you disappear into the bathroom, and they can't say or do whatever to affect you because you're not there, right? So it's like that was kind of the thing then. So then it's like, as I'm trying to do this healing work, then it was kind of like the the snakes mellowing out, because they don't have to be on the defensive all the time now I'm processing through this stuff, and now I'm like the poster that I have in my room that's got that little image I found off Facebook, and it says, it's got the girl in black and the girl and sitting next to the girl in white. It's like the same girl but like different outfit, and then it says it's the same outfit, just one's black, one's white. It says, I sat with my anger long enough, she told me her real name was grief. So it's like, that I get that. I really do. And that just kind of hit me again. Okay, but yeah, not trying to do that. Although I will say, I feel like it's been a while since I've really done that again. There was a long time that I did that a lot. It was like almost every video I'm crying my way through it. But yeah. Trying to, I feel like at an hour and 19 minutes, I feel like I might go ahead and wrap it up. But like there's one other thing that I've been thinking about, and it's like, do I want to go ahead and just do that, or do I want to save that? I've been saving it. Do I maybe save it one more day or another week? Who knows? Yeah, I'll save it for now. So I'll go ahead and wrap this up. And as always, I appreciate you. Until the next time, see ya.